In 2003, Slam magazine released their top 75 NBA players of all time, a list that was compiled via many different sources, from reporters to NBA media members, coaches and executives, and longtime writers and journalists. However, almost immediately, when I first saw this list, there's a lot of things that caught my attention. The first thing you might notice is that Wilt and Oscar are 2 and 3 behind MJ. But today, the majority of people would put these two behind Larry, Magic, or Kareem. In 2003, all of these guys have been retired for a long time already. Yet now, in 2023, 20 years since this list was created, the opinions of them changed, and they somehow moved up to surpass Wilt and Oscar? It's not like any of them could have done anything themselves to move up the list. It's because of us, the fans and the media, that changed the standards of how we should rank the all-time great players. I'd even go as far as to say that the people responsible for this change probably weren't even around to watch them play. So, do our opinions even matter? That's something to think about. Anyway, how's it going, folks? My name's Andy, and today, let's dissect these all-time rankings from 2003, and the biggest things that most of us today would definitely not agree with. Why did our opinions change over time, and do you think our newfound perceptions are justified? I think we gotta start with the most glaring ranking, Oscar Robertson at number 3. Nowadays, people would be hard-pressed to even include him in their top 10, maybe even top 15 to be honest. Heck, when we talk about the greatest point guards ever, it's almost unanimously a two-person race between Magic and Curry. No one even brings up Oscar anymore. There are a couple of reasons why this is the case, and why Oscar's ranking was absurdly high back in the day but fell off over time. At the time of his retirement in 1974, a huge swath of the population believed him to be the greatest player of all time. There was Wilt as well, but Oscar Robertson was the complete package. A 6'5" guard who was scoring 30+ points a game, and he was doing it very efficiently, in an era where efficiency was not even a thing. You add on his ridiculous number of rebounds and assists. The dude was Mr. Triple-Double before people even cared about triple-doubles. Everyone used to mystify and look at him the same way that people in the 80s and 90s looked at Jordan, almost like a godlike figure. I dug up some articles back in the 60s, like this one from 1968, when a journalist explained why he's the greatest of all time. Quote, "What makes Robertson the best ever? The consensus seems to indicate that it is his perfect build, which gives him the strength and power of a big man, and enables him to retain the agility and dexterity of a little man. Then, it is Oscar's mastery of each of those skills that make up the perfect basketball player more completely than anyone ever has before. And finally, it is his determination and tough-mindedness, combined with that basic unselfishness of his play, that enables him to make the maximum use of those skills." There are endless numbers of quotes from his peers and coaches alike that worshipped him. In 2003, when this Slam article came out, a lot of voters back then were still old enough to remember a time when Oscar was considered the greatest player ever, and his ranking reflected that. However, as the decades went by, things have changed. People started to value championships more than individual success on a losing team. You know, rings culture. Despite Oscar's greatness, there's one notable exception on his otherwise stellar resume: his lack of championships. In particular, his inability to win the title as the main guy on the team. In 10 seasons with the Cincinnati Royals, he never even reached the finals. It wasn't until 1971 when he teamed up with Kareem when he finally won his first and only championship. At that point, he was out of his prime. The rings argument is also why Wilt's ranking fell off over the years too, despite being the most dominant player until the arrival of MJ. I also think Oscar's exclusive honor of averaging a triple-double became diluted, as Russell Westbrook shattered his record and also showed that it's possible to do it. For these reasons, Oscar's ranking fell as the years went by. He wasn't the same mystified, godlike figure that he was once perceived as. Speaking of rings culture, another notable ranking you might have noticed was Kareem being at number 7, behind Magic and Larry. Right now, most would have him at number 3, ahead of both of them and only behind MJ and LeBron. The reasons for this are quite simple. They look at his resume, they see some absurd stats, his ridiculous longevity, and his total points scored along with his 6 championships. It's easy to put him so high now, because he fits all the criteria in what we're looking for an all-time great. Back then, the way people viewed Kareem was not the same. Due to his unfriendliness to the media during his career and even years after it, the voters did not like him, and that impacted his ranking. It wasn't just that though. It was because even with his 6 rings, he won 5 of them with Magic, and Magic was seen as the catalyst of those Lakers teams in the 1980s. In fact, before Magic arrived, Kareem and the Lakers were struggling in the playoffs. Unlike Kareem, Magic was way more likable, way more charismatic, and he got the bulk of the credit for turning the Lakers into a dynasty, not Kareem. As the years went by, I think more and more people have looked back on Kareem's career and have a newfound appreciation for him. He did so many things that he didn't get praised for back in the day, especially his longevity. He remained an elite player for such a long time. This is something that he has over Magic and Bird, and everyone started to value longevity more now. And for like 3 decades, he was the all-time leading scorer. These things definitely do matter. So there's a couple of other players I noticed down the rankings that I feel like they've gotten a much better ranking now than they did before. Another guy that stands out is Hakeem Olajuwon. If you ask most basketball fans today, they'd probably put Hakeem ahead of guys like Jerry West, Elgin Baylor, and Dr. J. But in 2003, it wasn't like that. The fans and voters who've witnessed Hakeem's entire career have mixed feelings on him. Most younger fans don't know about this, but for a long time, Hakeem was a hothead with anger issues in Houston. There were times when he'd threaten to sit out games if he wasn't traded, and demanded a bigger salary even when he was under contract. At one point, the Rockets accused Hakeem of faking an injury so he wouldn't play until his demands were met. And coupled with the Rockets banning several players due to cocaine use, the team struggled to sustain a competent roster. It was a tumultuous time for the team, and Hakeem was caught in the mix. It wasn't until the mid-1990s and as he got older when his reputation became better. By 2003, a lot of older voters recall Hakeem being an unlikable guy, so it probably affected their voting. Not just that, but in general, this ranking tends to respect the older players a lot more than people do today. I mean, I never hear anyone talk about Elgin Baylor anymore, and when they do, it's about him losing 7 times in the finals and finishing his career without a single championship. It's similar with Jerry West. He's 1 for 8 in the finals. The two of them combined to have the most finals losses in history. And this has become an important criteria nowadays. Think LeBron James, for example. How many times have you heard his finals record being held against him? A lot of times, for sure. We view losing in the finals in a negative way because it means these players could not close out when it mattered the most, it's a weird way to look at it. I feel like you get criticized more for losing in the finals than losing before that, which I don't agree with. This type of thinking has impacted Baylor and West's rankings over time. Two guys once considered so highly aren't looked at in the same light anymore, due to their finals losses being a dark cloud over their head. Since these rankings came out in 2003, a lot of our favorite superstars from the 2000s were still early in their careers, so they weren't ranked that high until their careers were over. Even so, there were still some head-scratchers. For example, Tim Duncan was ranked below Allen Iverson. This list came out in early 2003, so at this point of Duncan's career, he only had 1 championship. Iverson, on the other hand, I remember watching the NBA back then, and he was incredibly popular. Probably the most popular player in the entire world in his heyday. A few years prior, he led his team to the finals, and it was a huge underdog story that the Sixers even took a game off the Lakers. Duncan was seen as a boring player to watch, which probably affected his ranking too, while Iverson was exciting. I never thought Iverson was a better player than Duncan, but I understand why he was ranked higher by some folks. Kobe was also pretty low here too, at number 59, despite having 3 championships under his belt, but we know Shaq was the driving force behind that three-peat. The voters knew that too. That's why he's lower than both of them. The fact that both Duncan and Kobe were ranked below AI shows, once again, that rings weren't as valued back then. Of course, as their careers progressed, Duncan and Kobe quickly surpassed Iverson, and it's not even comparable anymore. There are some other interesting choices near the top of the rankings, like Bill Russell being 4th. As I mentioned, older players seem to be more respected than they are today, where everyone's like, oh my gosh, they played against plumbers and milkmen. People have regurgitated that nonsense, and that's why guys like Russell and Wilt aren't seen as demigods anymore. Russell being labeled the 4th best player of all time, it's not a huge anomaly, but it's somewhat of a surprise. Anyway, that sums up my opinions of this Slam magazine ranking from 2003. It sparks an interesting discussion over how our criteria for ranking players have changed over time. Back in the day, not everyone thought rings mattered as much as they do today, and it seems they valued individual performances first and foremost. That's obviously not the case today, where rings are the first thing we use to judge somebody. What do you think of this changing phenomenon? Are you a fan of rings culture, or do you think it's been heavily overstated? Do you prefer the way we used to rank players back in the day? Let me know in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching, and of course, as always, I'll see you next time. Peace.